the sound. I miss it sing this song of culture. I miss it singing them songs of love. I miss it singing them songs of culture. I miss it singing them songs of love. I miss it for a word ever and a backward never. For a word ever and a backward never. Yeah.
Welcome back, everybody, to Forward Ever. I'm one of your hosts, Ogden Oguku, a member of the AAPRP. I've been involved with the so-called work study circle since I moved to the Inland Empire in around 2018. I'm here with uh, one of the folks involved with one of the projects I became interested when I saw them on IG. I followed their page years back, Congo Friends. They do great work in, highlighting just of various list of issues facing the Congo in the modern time, as well as, give good history in terms of what's led to some of the political issues and strifes with the Congo historically. And Maurice is one of those folks involved with Congo Friends. Maurice, how are you doing today?
I'm great, man. I'm great. Yourself?
I'm doing good. I'm excited. You guys have been just a good organization, and I like what you guys have been doing. I like the fact that you guys are focusing on the Congo because that's the Congo is an overlooked entity, right?
Yeah,
Congo's so crucial to Africa and the history of Africa and how Africa's been colonized. I mean, Patrice Lumumba assassination sent a shock throughout the continent.
right.
He's forever immortalized. So many Africans from central to the west to the east to the south all mourn that loss. It was a huge loss because of how crucial the Congo is, being a, a, a resource-rich country, um, from multiple resources. I mean, even in the modern context, you have the cobalt, which helps fuel a lot of the cell phones. A lot of
Hmm.
people don't know majorities. I think 70+% of the uranium used in the nuclear bomb that was dropped in Japan came from the Congo as well. So, in the mines
Even
over
higher.
there,
I think it's in the high 90s.
yeah. So it's a
Yeah,
lot of resources in the Congo area that have been crucial for world projects, and it's just a major
yeah,
political point in terms of the issue of their sovereignty.
yes. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Chairman Mao has been reputed to say that he who controls the Congo controls the world.
Mm.
Uh,
Many
a bit of
Africans.
hyperbole, but the the fact that you could even make such a statement about a particular location is crucial. You said something to me that I've done so many interviews around the Congo,
Mm.
but you just said something the way you
Greetings, welcome, hello. We hope that you are doing well on this day. Hopefully, you're at your highest level of mental, physical, and spiritual strength or rapidly approaching. We are glad that you are joining us. Welcome to this week's episode of Our Ancestors' Voices, a weekly program sponsored by the All African People's Revolutionary Party. And our important topic today, the Kwame Ture they didn't tell you about. A lot of an entire generation of young people are becoming aware of Kwame Ture, formerly Stokely Carmichael, and his great contributions, his great Pan African work, his tremendous anti Zionist presence, and his overall contributions to forward human progress. And that's a wonderful thing. What we hope to share with you today, or what we will share with you today, are many aspects of Kwame's early political development and his work towards the latter years of his life, living in Guinea Conakry, that are not nearly as well known. So we think that you'll benefit greatly from this discussion, and we give honor and respect to the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere. You know, it's a whenever you're engaged in organizing work, you understand that organizing work is all about raising consciousness and building capacity. That's what it's about. So this is not a criticism, but one of the things working with a lot of new people to movement work, a lot of younger folks to movement work, is getting folks to understand the proper, as we call it in the All African People's Revolutionary Party, nation, class, gender analysis. Not just a class analysis, not just a race analysis, not just a gender analysis, but a nation, class, gender analysis. So a lot of the marches, this is great that people are marching, but you know, whose streets are it, our streets? No, this is the indigenous peoples of the Western Hemisphere streets, right? And we have to constantly reinforce that message because that's the correct message. So we want to take that opportunity to say that, like, it's not your streets, it's not whose land it is, it's their land, and it was stolen from them, and there will be no justice. And largely, a lot of what we're out here seeing protesting against today is because those types of injustices have never been properly addressed. So this is indigenous people's land. And also we of course honor our African ancestors who have struggled significantly. We'll talk later, but next week's program, we're gonna address this message rolling around in African community circles that we should sit out these protests. We're going to address that nonsense um, and do it on the basis of any African who says that doesn't understand our history and clearly is not involved in organizing work to organize our people. Anybody says we should sit this out is not involved in the day-to-day work. They might have voted in a dumbass election, but they're not involved in the daily work. There's no one that's involved in the daily work would say something as idiotic as that, because we would know that if they're coming after other people, as much as this society has terrorized us for the last 500 years, if they're coming after other people, I don't know what kind of fool thinks that you're safe and they're not going to come after you. And they're not just using this as a pretext to come after other communities, certainly the African community. So we'll talk about that next week. But this is the thinking that you have when you're in touch with your African ancestors. You understand the connection. You understand the African continuum. You're not confused and you don't think that you're just an individual independent of all the struggles that we've engaged in for all these centuries. We've been going through this nonsense. So we're glad that you joined us today. And we look forward to talking about the life of Kwame Ture and a lot of the things that you most likely never knew about. So we start just by the brief introductions that we always do. This program is sponsored again by the All African People's Revolutionary Party, AAPRP. And the APRP is a revolutionary, independent, mass, Pan-African political party with its base in Africa. Africa is primary for us. Our objective is Pan-Africanism, which we define as a united socialist Africa. And we came to this because we know that it is the solution to the problems that Africans and or people of African descent face everywhere we exist on the planet Earth today. And our work to achieve Pan-Africanism is being activated and carried out through the strategy outlined in Kwame Nkrumah's Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare, uniting all of the Pan-African formations on the ground throughout the African continent. And this program, Our Ancestors' Voices, is hosted by myself, Ajamu, and my daughter, the newly anointed Dr. Shakura Umi. So with this, I will turn it over to Shakura to get us started.
Thank you. Greetings, everyone. What's up? All right. So, we're talking about such an iconic, very special mentor and really founder. I always think humbly when I think about Baba Jamu's book, A Guide for Organizing Defense Against White Supremacists, Fascist Violence, Patriarchy and Fascist Violence. I think about how if Kwame had never decided to go home, and I'm sure Baba Ajamu will talk about that later. But if he had never decided to go to the continent, he never would have met Kwame Nkrumah. He never would have been influenced by Kwame Nkrumah or Sekou Touré, and therefore Kwame Nkrumah never would have been able to convince him to establish chapters of the All African People's Revolutionary Party here in the United States of America. And it's because of Kwame Nkrumah, because of Sekou Touré, and because of Kwame Touré's legacy, because of their resilience, because of their fight for understanding that Africans deserved a better circumstance. Because of all those things, I can honestly say that I am sitting here talking to you all today. It's possible that my ideologies and legacy would have brought me back to this space in a different capacity. But now we'll never know, and I'm okay with that because I know for a fact that I have Kwame Ture to thank. And again, because of his predecessors, right? Showing him the way. So let's talk more about how he came to be who he was. Because again, like we all have to reflect on how we got to the positions we're in. We all need to reflect on that. We worked hard. I'm not discounting that. But in addition to us working hard, someone sacrificed, someone influenced us, someone created some type of idea that we were enhanced by. And because of that, we were able to make different decisions that allowed us to be in the positions we're in today. And I mean financial positions, I mean mental positions, I mean physical positions, spiritual, however you want to define that, right? So let's continue to set a frame. Let's continue to honor those who have come before us and allowed us to be in these spaces because, again, this is how you continue to remind yourself that things are bigger than you. And more importantly, this is how you humble yourself about knowing that there is still more work to be done. So we start with honoring Kwame Ture by thinking about his lineage, the fact that he was born in a Caribbean country known as Trinidad on June 29th in 1941 and he was named Stokely Carmichael. This young man moved to the Bronx, New York, with his mother and his siblings at just 10 years old. And he excelled in high school, and because of that, was accepted into Howard University by 1960. During his time at Howard, he engaged in, you guessed it, political debates regularly and became more and more in line with the leftist views. He even joined the Nonviolent Action Group, which was Howard's contingent for the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And I think back to, the impacts that Kwame Ture had on my life. Of course, when I met Kwame Ture, I was very young. I think I was barely 3 or 4, so I wasn't really old enough to remember a lot of what was happening. But now that I'm older, Baba Ajamu and I really enjoy watching some of his videos when he was a younger activist. As he got older, even once his cancer diagnosis kicked in, he was still doing interviews and he was still doing activism work to be interviewed about. And it's really nice to be able to put all of these pieces together and to be able to see the kind of person that he grew into being because it was very clear that he loved his people. It was very clear that he wanted to do his part. And it was also clear that he didn't feel like he had done enough and that he was constantly trying to do more and more to help free Africa and to help free the masses of people so that we could have a better way of experiencing the world. And you can't you just can't ignore something like that to think that somebody would be so caring and so empathetic and considerate knowing that he would never get a chance to meet half the people that he worked so hard to change their conditions for, but knowing that it wasn't about that. It was about him continuing to use every breath in his body, every energy that he had, every cell energy that he had to make a difference, because he knew that these realities that we are living in are not fair for any of us. And he also knew that because of that, something else needed to be different for that to happen. All right. Okay. And then if we move into kind of breaking down more of who he is, he continued to develop his movement stripes. And this is the key, you all. This is why we always say we want you to join some organization that's working for justice, because Kwame Ture didn't just stop with his activism on campus at Howard. He continued to build his movement stripes by being active and participating in freedom rides. He was locked up 26 different times, arrested 26 different times between 1961 and 1966 for his civil rights activism. It's because of him that in 1964, even in 1965, even in 1966, he made a name for himself. I should say it's because of his passion, and it's because of his humanism, I should say. He made a name for himself inside by the movement by being a key contributor to the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party in 1964, the Lowndes County Freedom Organization in 1965, and he became the newly elected chair of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee in 1966. He helped usher in the Black Power era in the movement and of the movement. And so continuing to think about the activism, right? Continuing to think about what was drawing him to do that, kind of breaking down his intention, breaking down his development, and breaking down how he knew that continuing to advance himself would only be possible if he were contributing to other organizations that were doing the work. And you see that he had, variations of the different organizations that he was in. Notice that in the 1960s, we didn't talk about any Pan-Africanism. We haven't talked about him going home to the continent because that wasn't on his path as of yet. His path for this point in time in history, his point in time for that herstory and that their story, was for him to start to be doing the groundwork while he was still a young college student, trying to advance himself and knowing that he wanted to do something to change circumstances. And so the best way he was able to do that was by involving himself in different opportunities as he saw fit. In 1967, he was appointed prime minister of the Oakland, California based Black Panther Party, helping to make that organization a national and international organization. And I guess the other thing we want to point out is, who's to say that his experiences with the freedom rides, being arrested 26 different times within a 5-year period, having his positionality with the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, the Lowndes County Freedom Organization, and even being the chair of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, who's to say that those experiences didn't continue to shape him in terms of his confidence to be the prime minister of the Oakland, California based chapter of the Black Panther Party? I would argue that they very much contributed to his ability to do that. I would argue that they educated him. I would argue they influenced him. I would argue his experiences led him into helping to advance the Black Panther Party in the 1960s because of his experiences in previous years with all the different things that he was involved with. I also like the fact that we can connect the fact that he was doing this work in the Mid-South and then moved to the West Coast and still was able to see how it was necessary, how it was important. Again, drawing that common denominator that the condition that African people find themselves in is very much a reflection of what's going on with Mother Africa herself. Even in 1969, he moved to Guinea-Conakry and became militant for the Democratic Party of Guinea and the All African People's Revolutionary Party, which he remained until his physical transition in 1998. So you all should definitely read you should read his books if you can, but you should definitely read some of the different experiences and exposures that he had. There's pieces that are out there where he's written about his experiences with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, where he found that that was such a big piece for him. And for a lot of students, they found that it's been really motivating, because if you are in school, then you are constantly taught and you're conditioned to believe that you don't really have power to make change. You don't really have the ability to have organizing people make change, and more importantly, that no one really cares about what's happening in the world. And if you're a student, no one really cares that you want to do something about changing the conditions of the world. But the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee literally proved that none of those things were possible. And what I love most about SNCC is they were students themselves, and they still found a way to try to prioritize what organizing meant for them. They not only organized for themselves, but they organized because they wanted to change the conditions for other people. And so just kind of thinking more about that and thinking about how all of this built in to him continuing on his Pan-Africanist journey, how he was able to develop his Pan-Africanist journey because of his experiences in the past. I would argue, even as a little boy, things that he took in, things that he noticed, how his parents raised him, conversations that he had with his siblings, all of that was based on him being able to be in the position he was in today. And I think that when I say today, I'm still talking about the impact that he's having on us. And I'm also still talking about how we still have a lot of work that he's expecting us to do. You know, if we are really to honor our ancestors, then that means trying to pick up the baton that he left for us so that we can continue the fight. And I would argue that part of that means, if you can, going home to the continent so that you can experience that, yes. But if not, then at least figuring out how you can contribute to an organization that's making a difference, how you can start an organization that is making a difference, or how you can personally find a way to at least donate to a Pan-Africanist organization if you're not ready to give yourself and your time to that organization. I think Kwame Ture would be very happy with those three options because that was how he lived his life. And again, being a 3 to 4 year old little child, I don't remember much about our conversations, but I do remember that he was very much a fan of Africa. He was very much a fan of African people. He made me very proud to be an African, even as a 3 year old. He made me very proud because he demonstrated that. He continued to hold that. He carried that everywhere he went. He never made me feel ashamed, and he didn't do things that made me feel like he was ashamed, which was remarkable and very much a encouragement and an inspiration to me. And again, as an adult, you know, watching his videos now, I very much understand that we are in the same organization because we believe in the same things. We have the same principles and we practice the same principles. And I think that, you know, if we were to add people who have taken really complex content and been able to simplify it, you know, we always talk about Malcolm and how he was able to take really very difficult things and simplify them to where anyone with any level of education could understand it. But Kwame Ture also was always really good at that. Kwame Nkrumah as well, but because we're focused on Ture, let's highlight that. He was very good at taking very complex things. He would take very day-to-day analogies and bring it into his point that he was making so that we could have a good, very succinct way of understanding it. And the thing about Ture is he didn't want to just talk just to talk. He always had evidence to back up what it was he was saying. And more importantly, he was very succinct and direct and concise with what it is he had to say. So I just really value those kind of things. And again, I think that being an organizer allowed him to have the kind of space to do those things because it taught him to be disciplined. It taught him to be principled. It taught him to be considerate of other people and their time. It taught him to be compassionate. You know, the whole reason for him doing the work that he was doing was because he wanted to change the conditions for society. He wanted to make the world better. He didn't want anyone to have any oppression that they were experiencing. That kind of humanity is rare nowadays. And I would argue that, you know, he was practicing the principles of the All African People's Revolutionary Party, humanism. He was practicing egalitarianism. He was practicing collaborative or collaboration or collectivism, excuse me. He was practicing those at points. So, you know, we just continue to think about how we can learn from him, how we can grow, and continue to do the work that he needs us to do. And again, in whatever capacity that looks like, are you in a position where you are open to the fact that you might get arrested for this work you're doing? Those are the conversations that I think need to be had. And I think in addition to them being had, asking ourselves how much bigger is this beyond us? Yes, it is scary to think about getting arrested, but I don't know if he necessarily had the choice of saying, so because it's scary, I don't want to do it. I think that things were much worse for people that looked like him back in the 1960s than they are for people that look like him today. And I think that if anything, we should try our best to humble ourselves and to be grateful that he was willing to sacrifice himself for us, and he's never met us. So we should kind of be in a position to sacrifice ourselves for those to come after us. It's going to take that kind of thought to get us to the point where we are away from the selfishness that has crafted how we exist in a society today. It's going to take more of us pulling from him and less of us thinking individualistically. There was nothing that could benefit him doing that work for himself. He knew that everything he was doing would only benefit the people to come after him. And he knew that working with Dr. King would only benefit the people to come after him. We've given seminars in the past where we've talked about how the two of them didn't necessarily agree on every single thing, but it was clear that they had connective ideologies. It was clear that they were able to find common denominators, that they wanted the conditions for African people to change, that they wanted the conditions for poor people to change, and they wanted the conditions for oppressed people to change. And that was enough for them to come together and be able to set aside their very specific differences because it was bigger than them. It's always been bigger than them. It's bigger than you and I. It's always been bigger than that. So being able to be reminded of those things, I think is going to continue to be key because we have a lot of work to do, you all. And now is not the time for us to feel burdened. Now is not the time for us to feel overwhelmed. Now is not the time for us to feel discouraged or like we've lost hope. I understand that things are scary and I understand that we are living in a vicious world right now. Now is the time to get organized, you all. Now is the time to get organized. If we didn't believe it before, now is the time to get organized. We have got to get organized because here's the thing. As I said, things were much worse for folks back in the 1960s, and they were able to resist against it. We can learn from them because they left us the tools. So who's to say that we're not capable of fighting back just like they did? Now is the time. So we have to continue to stay vigilant and we have to continue to remember that this is bigger than us. But we also have to remember that we don't have to take this lying down. We can do something about it. And I would argue it starts with us elevating our political consciousness and education so that we can be in a better position to understand why joining an organization is going to be key, or at least supporting an organization that is actively resisting against the terrorism that we're experiencing currently, so that we can one day physically be a part of that organization to see a better world for all of us and our children and godchildren and anyone else to come after us.
Thank you, Shakura, for that. And let us continue on and just talk a little more about how we came to be where we are. As soon as I get this to cooperate, talking about Kwame's early political development. So, one of the things that's not nearly as known, you all, is that Shakur mentioned Kwame had a real interest in debating. Obviously, if you've heard him speak, you know this. And he joined the debate team at Howard University. He took a real liking during that time period of 1960 of reading communist literature. He enjoyed reading literature from Karl Marx and Frederick Engels, Vladimir Lenin, Rosa Luxemburg, all of the forces and figures in the Bolshevik Revolution. He did that at a time when reading such literature was considered treason in this country, and still he had that interest and was not deterred from doing that. And it was this interest that attracted him to an anti-imperialist march that was taking place in Washington, D.C., off of the Howard University campus. And he went to this march because all of the people that he was engaged in terms of reading and debating this communist literature, they were European, they were white. And so he went to this march at the invitation of some of these folks, and his anticipation was that it would be nothing but Europeans at this march. And it was mostly Europeans, but there was a contingent of young Africans, college student level African people who were engaged in this anti-imperialist march. So he, of course, approached them and asked them, who are you all? What are you doing? And are you a part of the Communist Party? Because it was I believe it was either the Communist Party USA or Socialist Workers Party, one of those white left groups that had organized the protest. And so he asked them if they were a part of that, thinking that they, of course, didn't look like the typical folks who joined those types of organizations at that time. And they responded, no, we're a part of the Nonviolent Action Group, which was a student contingent at Howard University, which was connected to the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, which had just been founded in 1960 at Shaw University in Raleigh, North Carolina. So at that point, they invited the then Stokely Carmichael to march with them, and he immediately became, active in NAG, in SNCC at Howard University. And one of their big events that came about was the organization of a campus-wide debate in 1961 at Howard University between Bayard Rustin and Malcolm X. And so, if you don't know, Bayard Rustin was a strong advisor to Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And it was Bayard Rustin that really brought the philosophy of nonviolence into the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, into the civil rights movement, and in a way that presented nonviolence as a principle. That was Bayard Rustin that brought that philosophy, that nonviolence is a principle. In other words, no matter what the enemy does, as civil rights workers, we had an obligation to remain nonviolent. It was a principle, meaning we never compromised it. So no matter what they did, no matter what the terror of racist white America was against us, we would maintain the discipline of nonviolence. And the philosophy behind making nonviolence a principle was that by us getting our heads bashed in, the world would see this, and the morality of that would force people to understand the necessity for political change. And so that was the philosophy of Bayard Rustin that he brought into the civil rights movement. And the SNCC students at Howard wanted there to be a debate around this. So, of course, the polar opposite of that was El Hajj Malik, El Shabazz, Malcolm X. And Malcolm X, then the national spokesperson for Elijah Muhammad and the Nation of Islam, was indeed the polar opposite. The Nation of Islam was preaching separation, that we can never get along with the white man. He's, as Dr. Khalid Muhammad used to say, he's 100% disagreeable and can't get along with anybody on the face of the earth. That was the philosophy of the Nation of Islam. So Malcolm X was as good as anyone they ever had at articulating that. So the idea behind debate was to bring these contrasting ideas together and do what intellectual struggle is supposed to do, motivate people to be inspired to engage in deeper analysis so that they can decide what direction they want to go in. And so what the students in NAG at Howard did is they organized a proposal. And at that time, the Howard University officials were trying so hard to make themselves look like they were so progressive and so supportive of the civil rights movement. The proposal the students wrote just said, yeah, we want to have a series of debates. And the Howard University administrators thought this was wonderful because they felt that having these types of academic events like a debate would steer the students away from this activism that SNCC was engaging in the southern US, and they didn't want that to come to Howard. So they enthusiastically endorsed this proposal to have these debates. They didn't know that the students were bringing Malcolm X. And by the time they found out, they were, of course, 100% opposed to it, but they had already approved the proposal. There was nothing they could do to stop it. So this debate happened at Howard University. Of course, you can listen to the debate between Malcolm and Bayard. It's on YouTube. And if you do, you'll see that Malcolm tore him up. And of course he tore him up because nonviolence cannot be a principle. It doesn't make any, the first law of human existence is self-defense. If someone's trying to kill you, even lower level animals understand this. Lower level animals are not going to, well, I'll be nonviolent no matter what you do to me. Nobody, and I remember once when I was doing security, taking Kwame around, we went to speak at a high school, an African high school, and there were about 60 African students in there, and a young African woman, young student, she said, "Well, I just don't. I think no matter what, I don't believe in violence." And Kwame, he was very skilled at these types of exchanges. He said to her, "So if you leave here and go to your house, and there are people attempting to kill your mother," he asked her, "Who do she told him, "My mother has been the most important person in my life." He said, "So if you go to your house and someone's attempting to kill your mother, would you do one, just sing 'We Shall Overcome' and remain apart from the effort to kill your mother, or would you try to do everything you could to get these people off your mother?" She said, "I'd do everything I could." He said, so he told her, "So then you don't believe in nonviolence." And everybody laughed and they got the point, including her. She had a huge smile on her face. So it's just dialectical that when you have a system of oppression that's trying to destroy you, you have a right to fight back against that system. So these are the principles that Malcolm X articulated, and it allowed him to easily win the debate. And when the question and answers came up, a young European woman, she got up there, she said, "Well, is this separate state you want to create? How are you going to do that? Where are you going to do it?" And he said, "Well, when your ancestors came here, they didn't have any problem figuring that out, and discussion over," right? It was very, very, very difficult to defeat Malcolm on those type of talking points. So he clearly won the debate, and it had a massive influence on the SNCC students, the SNCC activists. And so they continued to follow Malcolm X after that debate. They began to copy his speeches that he gave at mosques around the country and at events, and they began to distribute those speeches to the SNCC organizers who were on the front line in the southern U.S. And they even continued, and this is not widely known, to maintain contact with Malcolm. And there was even a meeting in a Washington, D.C. ice cream parlor that was not planned, but that happened with Kwame Ture, who was Stokely Carmichael then, a couple of other SNCC activists, and Malcolm X and the Fruit of Islam soldiers that were escorting him out of the ice cream parlor. And they talked about maintaining contact and continuing to exchange ideas. And you have to understand that because, most people who know anything about the civil rights movement, that Malcolm X was invited by SNCC to Selma, Alabama in 1965, just a few days before Malcolm was assassinated. This is how that happened. There was a relationship that was built. And the reason why that relationship evolved, you all, is because Malcolm's nationalist influence continued to make its mark on the organizing experiences of the SNCC organizers. And the reason why that happened is because the SNCC organizers like Kwame, they went into places like Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and they stayed with the local organizers in those areas. And those people, and by local, I'm talking about the local people, the sharecroppers, people like Miss Fannie Lou Hamer in Macomb County, Mississippi, people like Amzie Moore in Mississippi, people like Medgar Evers. They stayed with these people at their houses. And these folks experienced daily terrorism from white America, daily terrorism. Miss Hamer's house was firebombed just because she had the audacity to attempt to register to vote. Her husband was fired from his job. She was kidnapped and beaten. And we're not even talking about the dozens of activists who were out and out murdered. We're talking about the daily terrorism these people experienced just for standing up for their dignity. And so the SNCC organizers experience this. Here they come from these elite universities around the country to the southern US, and they're living in the houses of these activists. And there's a story that came out about Amzie Moore. And if you don't know anything about Amzie Moore, you should study this. This is one of the most courageous Africans I've ever studied. This was a sharecropper in Mississippi, and the white cracker sheriff in the county of Mississippi would go around. This was a cracker that was known for savagely brutalizing the Africans there in that region of Mississippi. And this sheriff said there's only two people that are bad meaning strong in this county. Me and Amzie Moore. He didn't mess with Amzie Moore, and he didn't mess with none of the people that Amzie Moore was dealing with because he knew that there would be consequences. That this man was not afraid of these crackers, no matter how many of them there were, no matter how many laws they had at their disposal. So the SNCC organizers would be staying, and there are many people like Amzie Moore, but using him as an example, the SNCC organizers would be staying at his house, people like Kwame, and they would come in there with the philosophy of Bayard Rustin and Dr. King and nonviolence as a principle, and they would be preaching that to these people who lived in these racist ass terrorist states. And Kwame talked about how Kwame told me that when he was at Amzie Moore's house, he'd sit there and they were telling Amzie Moore about nonviolence, and Amzie Moore was cleaning his shotgun and loading it after he cleaned it. And he was telling them, okay, yeah, that nonviolent stuff gonna get y'all killed. That's what he told them. And after they were there doing the work and they experienced the day-to-day terror, I told the story here about how we were driving Kwame from Sacramento State University to Sonoma State University, and we were late, and he asked to drive, and he took over and was going almost 70 miles an hour on the 45-mile-an-hour curves through Napa County here in California, wine country. And we asked him how he learned to drive like that, and he told us the people like Amzie Moore taught him to drive like that in Mississippi because the Klan chased them every night. And if they'd have caught him, they would have viciously murdered him. So this was the reality that they lived with. And so after a while of experiencing this, the SNCC workers began to see the impracticality of looking at nonviolence as a principle. And SNCC made the decision that they would begin to see nonviolence as a tactic and not a principle. And a lot of this was influenced by Malcolm X and Malcolm X's influence on them. And that all of that began to change the philosophy of the people who organized in SNCC. And if you understand that, then you understand why SNCC eventually came to Black Power. That was a natural progression. So fast forwarding to 1967, after the Black Power March in June of 1966, Mukasa Dada went out in front of the March Against Fear through the Delta in Mississippi and was organizing the sharecroppers and convincing them to reject FCLC's slogan of Freedom Now and to embrace SNCC's new slogan of Black Power. And they came to that, SNCC did. It's often talked about like they didn't have any preparation. It just kind of just happened. Nothing just happened. That's an on-dialectical analysis. They had to clearly analyze that. And based on the things I just talked about, they realized that this concept of just fighting to integrate in white society was not really what they were interested in pursuing. They had experienced absolute terror at the hands of white people in the South. The last thing they wanted to do was sit up next to these people, these barbaric people. Nobody wanted to do that. They knew that what they were fighting for was not to sit at some filthy counter and eat some nasty food. Look, no offense against anybody, but as African people, we don't even go. If we see Europeans in the kitchen, most of us won't even eat at a place like that. Not saying anything against them as European people. We just we like our food. We like it to taste differently. We have a different taste mechanism than they do. Like I lived in Portland, Oregon, and Portland, Oregon is internationally known as a city of great food. And all the white people there would tell me all the time, oh, the food here is so great. And I would be like, this food is bland as hell. I don't know what people are talking about. There were some spots that were good, but I never saw, I lived there 7.5 years. I never saw this wonderful food that these white people were talking about, right? It's just, we just eat food differently. It's not saying that ours is better. It's not saying theirs is worse. I'm just saying as a cultural fact, African people are not going to be breaking their necks to sit down and eat white people's food. That's just objective. And so that was not, people, they realized that's not why we were fighting, is to sit at these nasty ass counters, ride these nasty buses. It was to bring power for our people. So this is how they came to understanding the necessity for power. And that meant Black power. And that's what they meant by that. And as Shakur mentioned, Kwame ended up, as Stokely Carmichael, joining and being quote unquote drafted into the Black Panther Party. There was an effort to merge SNCC into the Black Panther Party, and that fell apart. A lot of the reasons for that were the counterintelligence efforts of the FBI, egoism of many of the individuals involved, and also just a lot of other variables were involved there, so that didn't happen. But Kwame Ture was drafted out of SNCC to become the prime minister for the National Black Panther Party. uh, Jamil Abdullah Alameen, who is a political prisoner today but was at that time H. Rap Brown, was drafted to become a minister in the Black Panther Party, and James Foreman was drafted to become an officer in the Black Panther Party. And Kwame did do a lot of work to bring a lot of people into the Black Panther Party and to uh, expand the Black Panther Party and help it become the national organization that you know it to be. But the primary contradiction that Kwame, then Stokely, had with the Black Panther Party was their lack of consistent political education processes. And a lot of people lie about that today. A lot of so-called historians lie about that. They say that Kwame didn't like the Panthers because they worked with white people. That was not his primary contradiction with the Panthers. His contradiction with them is that he felt they did not have a consistent political education process that would direct their work with white organizations and every other kind of organization, as well as their vision for how they were going to bring about revolution the way they said they wanted to do that. That was his chief criticism against that. And he wasn't the only one that had that criticism. If you read Asada by Asada Shakur, she shares that position clearly. If you read all of the books written by Black Panther, if you read Last Man Standing, Geronimo Jijaga, he talks about that. David Hilliard talks about it in This Side of Glory. Bobby Seale talks about it and Seize the Time. They all talked about the necessity. Elaine Brown certainly talks about it in A Taste of Power. They all talked about the weakness of the Black Panther Party to develop a clear analysis. Sada Shakur talked about how someone hung an African Liberation Day poster up in the Black Panther Party office, and they were so narrow in their interpretation of nationalism that they, said the poster was inappropriate to hang up there. And this is a anti-colonial movement. That's what African Liberation Day is, which the Black Panther Party saw themselves as a part of. So this is the kind of thing that Kwame was talking about. So this led him to go to Vietnam, to Hanoi at that time in 1967 during the height of the U.S. Imperialist war against Vietnam. And Kwame had a meeting with Nguyen Ao Thuc, who by the name Ho Chi Minh. Ho Chi Minh wasn't his real name. That was a name that he used. He had many monikers, and Ho Chi Minh was one of them. And for some reason, that one stuck. But his real name was Nguyen Ao Thuc, the leader of the Vietnamese resistance, the leader of the Viet Minh Front. And he had lunch with Kwame Ture, Stokely Carmichael, then in Hanoi. And Kwame asked him, what do you think? What do you suggest? I have these problems with the Black Panther Party. I have these issues with SNCC. What do you think? And the COINTELPRO had done a lot of work to turn the Black Panther Party against Kwame, to turn SNCC against Kwame. So he was asking this question. And when Al Thuc told him, "You're African, why don't you go to Africa?" So Kwame, influenced by that, as well as the fact that SNCC had already taken a delegation trip 3 years before that to Guinea to visit with Secretary in the Democratic Party of Guinea. And Kwame Nkrumah was in Guinea at that time, as the picture illustrates there at Via Sili in Guinea Conakry, with Kwame Ture on the left, who was at that time still Stokely Carmichael, and Miss Shirley Graham Du Bois on the right, and Kwame Nkrumah in the middle. So in 1968, Kwame took his first trip to Ghana. And as Shakur mentioned, the manuscript of the Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare was completed by Nkrumah and given to young Stokely Carmichael, given to Amilcar Cabral, who was the founder of the African Party for the Independence of Guinea-Bissau, the PAIGC, who were staging their anti-colonial war against Portugal from Guinea Conakry. And Kwame Ture, Stokely Carmichael, then read the manuscript in one night and was committed to carrying out the vision to create the All African People's Revolutionary Party, the All African Committee for Political Coordination, the All African People's Revolutionary Army. And so this is why it's important to know this history. We talked about, Kwame got the book when he was Stokely, he read it. He took the assignment. There were assignments given. The first work study circle for the APRP was established, and there were assignments given. And the assignments were that Cabral would take the assignment of running the Portuguese out of Guinea-Bissau. And of course, we know that that happened. The Portuguese were defeated in Guinea-Bissau. They were defeated in Angola, the Popular Movement for the Liberation of Angola, which Cabral was a co-founder of as well. And they were defeated in Mozambique by the National Union for the Liberation of Mozambique, Frelimo. And so that assignment was complete. The assignment that Kwame Nkrumah had in the work study circle was to return to power in Ghana. And of course, we know that unfortunately, Kwame Nkrumah never again set foot in Ghana. And he died in Romania in April of 1972, living in Guinea-Conakry, living out his life in Guinea-Conakry and never being able to return to the land of his birth, Ghana. So that assignment, unfortunately, was not ever able to be fulfilled, and it's still not fulfilled. We're still working towards completing that assignment today. And Kwame Ture and another young brother, Lamine Janga, who just made his physical transition a few short years ago, but brother Lamine was from Gambia in West Africa, and he walked. You can look at a map and see how impressive this is. He walked from Gambia all the way to Guinea-Conakry to work with Kwame Nkrumah and Sekou Touré as a 17-year-old young man. And so the assignment that Lamine and Kwame had, who was again still Stokely Carmichael, was to, as Shakur mentioned, to initiate the All African People's Revolutionary Party in the Western Hemisphere. And of course, as we already mentioned, Kwame was already a citizen militant of the Democratic Party of Guinea, the party of Sekou Touré, and he was a Central Committee member, the first Central Committee member, on the first Central Committee, rather, for the All African People's Revolutionary Party, where he remained until, in both organizations, Central Committee for the Democratic Party of Guinea and the All African People's Revolutionary Party, until his physical transition on November 15th, 1998. So this is the part that we'll spend the last few minutes talking about, because this is the part from 1969 to 1998 where there's such utter confusion about the life, work, and contribution of Stokely Carmichael and then Kwame Ture. There's so much confusion. And the reason for this confusion is sad in and of itself. It's rooted in this American exceptionalism that everything, the most important thing that happens in the world is what happens in the US. And anything that happens outside the US is not as important as what happens in the US. I was talking to someone not long ago, and I was telling them, I'm planning another trip to Africa to do some organizing work for the APRP there. And we have a summer school that we are running in Azania, or what you call South Africa, and going there. Summer is in what's winter here, so it's in January. So going there to help do work in the school in January. And this person, well, why are you going to Africa? That's running away from the struggle. Because they said, well, would you stay there a long time? Like I'm trying to move to Africa. And they were like, why would you do that? It's like you're running away from the struggle. I'm like, well, you say that because you see America as the center of the struggle. America's not the center of any goddamn thing. It's just the place where we were kidnapped and brought here and forced to be here. It's the indigenous people's land. They're fighting for their land back. We're African people. We're fighting for our land back. America's not the center. You believe that lie that they taught you, that the only thing that matters is what happens here. We don't believe that. We know better than that. We know that most of the important things happening on the planet Earth are not happening here and never will happen here. So this is why this narrative is out here that Kwame didn't do anything. It's like he was this great activist organizer from 1960 to 1968, And then he just disappeared. He just gave speeches once a year in the US and he didn't do anything else. And that's basically, for most of you, that's what you know about Kwame Ture. You don't know too much of anything else. And that's the reason why American exceptionalism, that you know that. Even Pernell Joseph's book, 2014 book, um, Stokely Alive, perpetuates that same backward narrative. And I'll say this: I read the book. I don't make a criticism unless I know what I'm talking about. I read the book a couple of times, and I will say between 1960 and 1968, Pernell Joseph's book about Kwame Ture is the best literature out there about the life of Kwame Ture. The problem is after 1968, it's an oblivion. There's nothing. There's nothing in his book. He does a great job of talking about Kwame Ture's development in the movement. In fact, a lot of the things that I talked about early on in this session, a lot of that is in that book. You know, how Kwame developed. He talked about a lot of that in his book and did a great job of illustrating Kwame's contribution in this society, especially during the Black Power movement. I thought Joseph's book was outstanding at painting a picture of how much public enemy number one Stokely Carmichael was in the late 1960s in this country. You think Osama bin Laden was public enemy number one? It was nothing compared to how people talked about Stokely Carmichael then in this country. So he did a great job articulating that. But the problem is, again, after Kwame went home to Africa, nothing. So we're going to spend the last few minutes talking about that. Kwame did work to build up the Democratic Party of Guinea. And not only that, to build up the work in Nkrumah's handbook. And remember, he had an assignment to build the AAPRP. And so that meant, as we say every week here, uniting the revolutionary formations on the ground in Africa into one entity, one organized entity, the entity being the All African Committee for Political Coordination. And that picture you see on your screen, you have people from 5 or 6 Pan-African organizations in Africa that all of them belong to, like the Pan-African Union of Sierra Leone, the Convention People's Party of Ghana, the African Party for Independence of Guinea-Bissau, the Democratic Party of Guinea. And all of those people in that picture are also cadre within the All African People's Revolutionary Party. This was the vision of Asajifo Kwame Nkrumah. This is our work. This is the work that I'll be doing when I go to Azania. It's all the work that we're doing, working with the APRP, the Pan-Africanist Congress, the Azanian People's Organization. This is the work that we're doing to bring about Pan-Africanism. I was just on a APRP call this morning. A lot of these people in this picture, including obviously Kwame Ture, are no longer physically with us. But we did have, Brother Imani, who's in the hat on the screen, who's Central Committee for the PAIGC in Guinea-Bissau, Central Committee for the AAPRP. We did have Brother Niarde, who's in the blue shirt, on the call today, who has been active in the Convention People's Party and the APRP in Ghana for decades. So this is our work, you all. And again, these two Africans were just, most of the other people are not here anymore, but these two Africans are. They were just talked to them this morning. So this is the work that we do. And this would not be where it is now without the contributions of Kwame Ture. This man made the decision to forego the national spotlight. He could have been a chancellor of any Ivy League school in this country. He could have been a mayor of a big city like New York or LA. He could have been a governor of one of these states, certainly New York. He would have had an opportunity to do that, or Mississippi. He would have had an opportunity to do that. He had no interest in that. As he himself said, his only interest is in the power of the organized masses. So he sacrificed all that to move to one of the poorest countries in the world, live in Guinea Conakry the last 30 years of his life, and build the AAPRP. Build the AAPRP. And so those of us who understand that, nothing is going to derail us from continuing that mission. You all can do whatever the hell you want to do. We are going to build this Pan-African political party because we know, like Kwame Ture taught us, that that is exactly what our people need. And so we really want to thank you for joining us today. We want to invite you back next week, June 22nd, Sunday. Our program next week is going to be why we oppose this we should sit it out nonsense. We're going to be talking about all these African people on social media talking about we should sit out these protests. We shouldn't do anything. We voted for Kamala Harris. Like that's something. Like that's a big something that you voted for one capitalist over another. You're not in any organization. You're not organizing anything. You couldn't even organize gas to come out of your ass properly. And you're going to tell us who are activists who put our lives on the line for justice, we gonna sit it out. You were already sitting it out. You never did do anything except sit it out. So we're gonna address that stupid nonsense next week. And we want to invite you to join us and tell a friend. And the QR code in the upper left-hand corner, the red and white one, you can get all the AAPRP programs on there. The Forward Ever shop, you can buy merchandise to support our party. You should do that. You should go to Could Communists through there and read. It's a revolutionary Pan-African blog, so please support that. And then for those of you in Northern California, again, we want to invite you to come out with us tomorrow evening. We have our teach-in on what's happening in the Sahel region of Africa, Burkina Faso, and what relevance that has to us here. So come out 6 to 8 at the Shakur Center, 3230 Broadway. We look forward to seeing you there. The bottom left, the blue-white QR code, you can still support African Liberation Day, so scan that one to do that. Give what you can, $5, $500, anything in between, $5,000 you should give it if you got it. Join the All African People's Revolutionary Party, www.aapr-intl.org. Join the party, help us build Pan-Africanism, make your contribution. The black and white QR code on the bottom right, the Burkina books and now Niger books as well become a monthly sponsor. This is our work on the ground in the Sahel, so help us build it. We're accumulating revolutionary literature. I had someone give me the collected works of Sekou Touré in French, and I got to find some way to get that to the comrades there in those French-speaking countries where we're doing wonderful organizing work. So go on that, scan that, and become a sponsor. Buy my book, A Guide for Organizing Defense Against White Supremacist, Patriarchal, and Fascist Violence. A Guide for Organizing Defense Against White Supremacist, Patriarchal, and Fascist Violence. I use 100% of the proceeds. I'm teaching weekly self-defense classes. I use 100% for the resources I need to do that. So if you could please help tell people about the book. I check periodically. I don't check often because I forget and it's not a priority in my mind. But this is June 15th, and I saw where only one book has been bought this month. I mean, I don't know what we're doing, right? But I know it's not a whole lot of us who are engaged in this day-to-day work. So the least you could do is, hey, I'm going to take this on. I'm going to let people know. I'm going to help these Africans organize this anti-fascist work. I'm gonna make it my mission to tell libraries to have this book in there, to organize book clubs to read this book. At least do that. That's a positive thing. I mean, if you can't even do that, then find a church or something to go. You need help. I mean, that's an easy thing to do. That's all you got to do is talk to people. And if you can't talk to anybody, then what the hell are you doing? Like you talk about it. I have never met a person who doesn't have some opinion they want you to hear about what needs to happen. I'm not the one you need to be talking to. You need to be talking to people that aren't engaged in this work. And these are the types of things you should be talking to them about. And if you're not doing that, then it's just intellectual masturbation. And we don't have time for that. So forward ever, backwards never. Stay clever. Get organized. Let's get free. We are winning. Don't believe those lies. We are winning. Have a great rest of your day.